The one good thing I'll say about Greatsword is that it does have a really uncanny ability to handle an opponent that's being super aggressive towards you. Being the kind of middleman in between a straight sword that's short but fast and an ultra great sword that's slow but also very damaging, the Greatsword allows you to counter Rushdown being a moderately fast weapon dealing out moderately decent combo damage, and as a result you can kind of contest Rushdowns from smaller weapons generally pretty well. It doesn't excel that well in the neutral, but as you can see here, when enemies were constantly rushing me down, even though I was summoning ganked in this fight for some reason, you could see that we were easily able to kind of just throw out the R1s and just combo the hell out of people. Plus, they're really good at roll catching. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, the Greatsword of Judgement as of July the 1st, 2016 did receive a bit of a buff in the latest patch that came out. And what's actually nice about this weapon now is it seemingly has a little bit more damage, at least in my build, than the Moonlight Greatsword when it is buffed. Now, the buff, from what I can tell, comes in the form of its weapon art, which has been buffed twofold. The first buff is the duration of the actual Dark Moon Blade that gets enchanted on the weapon. It used to only last about 13-14 seconds. Now it seems to last about 26-27 seconds, which is quite significant when you consider the fact that most PvP matches are over in under a minute. So just by using the weapon art twice, you can have the extra damage boasted on your weapon and deal some heavy hits. With that said, the damage, it seems, has also been buffed from what you get with the Dark Moon Blade weapon art. It used to only be 80 points of damage, now it seems to be 110 points of damage. And that can be significant, like I said, because now it actually deals more damage than the Moonlight Greatsword. And while the Moonlight Greatsword does technically have a little bit better of a projectile, the Greatsword of Judgement is a lot more viable now than it was before. Before, it would just suffer way too much because the damage wasn't there, the weapon buff wasn't that good, and the weapon arts, while not all that useful, the thrust forward is very hard to catch somebody unless you're punishing a big mistake. And the projectile is a bit like the Moonlight Greatsword version, it's just a little bit more delayed, but then it gets whipped out super fast. So it can be good in certain situations, but where I find that this weapon really shines is when you are trying to fight somebody that's kind of trying to parry you, so to speak. And I know that seems really weird, but what's really effective about this weapon is because it is unique to the magic weapons that you can whip out projectiles from certain great swords, you can kind of bait an enemy into parrying and then actually just end up hitting them with the projectile. If you hit them with the weapon and the projectile at the same time, even if they catch you on the parry, they're going to be taking a ton more damage than they normally would unless they parry you perfectly and don't take any damage, but that's really unlikely since you're dealing projectile damage and everything to them as well. So what makes it effective is usually when enemies are about to die, they sometimes go Hail Mary and try to go for a last minute parry. If they only need one hit until they're dead, busting out the projectile when an enemy's approaching you, trying to like maybe come up to you and bait you into attacking to parry you, if you whip out that weapon art, you're going to end up catching them. And even if they do parry you, you're still going to likely kill them without any issue. If they come at you and try to contest you with a trade, if your weapon art comes out with a projectile, you're going to be doing way more damage than they're ever going to do to you. And being a greatsword, you are likely going to knock them out of whatever attack they're doing, unless of course they have an ultra greatsword, in which case they might be able to armor through, but likely not. Now here you can see me fighting the Onikiri. I don't recommend you contest that weapon art. Luckily enough, we did have enough with the Greatsword to actually not be comboed after the Onikiri weapon art, but I still wouldn't recommend contesting it with a Greatsword. It's not going to come out in your favor usually. So right here is an example. The guy ended up rolling into me and I hit him with the projectile and the weapon as I was doing the charged weapon art with the R2, and we took off over half his health. And we finished him off on a roll punish again with a quick R1 combo. Simple, clean cut, very, very effective. Now, when you are using the Greatsword of Judgement, I do recommend that you always keep it buffed to the best of your ability. Usually whipping out the projectile, like you can see there, trying to catch a guy parrying. This guy, I hate people that play like this. They're just running at me and trying to bait me for the parry, and he ended up getting closer than I thought and coming out with the parry. Nonetheless, though, it's not too much of a big deal. If he was using a heavier weapon, we would have played a little bit more cautious, but since he was using a smaller weapon, we do have to contest the space in front of us, because if he gets in close with a small weapon, he's likely going to catch our roll or keep rushing us down because he consumes such a little stamina. So we have to dictate the pace a little bit better with a greatsword. That's kind of how you have to play the matchup against these smaller weapons that use the quick step. But you can see that it is sometimes easy to kind of bait out the parry with the projectile and still hit somebody for a good amount of damage. Right here, I should have killed him, but I made a mistake and followed up with the kick R1 instead of a follow-up regular R1 to kill him. And then this drags out the match a little bit longer than normal, but essentially you can see the effectiveness and the amount of damage that we can do with this weapon while it's buffed. And just whipping out the projectile, like I said, just throw it out there. At least you get the weapon buff, the extra 110 points worth of damage. This sword is actually decent. It's not the best because great swords in general, in my opinion, aren't that great. But if you have a spellcaster build, I would really recommend giving this sword a try. It can definitely be useful in some certain situations, like in the beginning clip where I mentioned that it can really help counter Rushdown because it's not really a master of anything. It's not a really fast weapon. It's not a high damaging weapon like an ultra great sword, but it's going to deal anywhere between 700 and 900 combo damage, which is still kind of significant, as well as it's going to be moderately fast, so it can catch things that enemies want to throw it at you. And since it does have a tiny bit of hyper armor, if an enemy comes at you with a running katana, for example, if you're fast and you can read that attack, if you whip out your R1, you're going to end up contesting it and comboing them for a lot of damage. So here is an example. I'm going up against a Chaos Blade, and you're going to see what's going to happen in just a second. So he sees me charging. He thinks he can contest me. His counter damage Leo Ring did a good amount of damage to me, but you can see here we almost took off 50% of his health. We took off maybe around 45% of his health. Unfortunately, he did catch us when we were ring swapping, so be very careful of that. I'm a very heavy ring swapper kind of PvPer. If you guys have seen any of my videos, you would know that. But at this point, we kind of, not necessarily are at a disadvantage, but we're going to kind of bait him in, because with a katana, enemies always think that they have the ability to rush you down and punish you a lot quicker than other weapons, being that a katana has an amazing running R1, really good rolling R1s, and of course an amazing weapon art. So using the bait of the R2 and then following it up with a weapon art using the bait of the R2 and following it up with two R1s is a really good bait, kind of like how people try to bait you by attacking and then parrying right after. Now at the start of this match, you saw me get caught twice on rolls, and that's because I rolled incorrectly. I ended up rolling towards him, not away from him, and I rolled as the weapon was just after it started up when I was supposed to roll after it was coming down. So I got hit twice out of my rolls from this Black Knight Greatsword, and he switched over to the Twin Princess Greatsword here. But you got to be a little bit careful with that when you're contesting an Ultra Greatsword. Just try to position yourself and double roll just to be safe. If you're trying to escape an Ultra Greatsword, the best tip I can give you, if you're over the 30% weight load, double roll. And always try to double roll away from the enemy. Don't ever try to roll into them, unless you're absolutely sure that you can get past their attack and punish them. So it is a bit of a, again, like a mind game, so to speak, on which direction you want to roll and how you want to punish. In this battle, we're going up against a standard straight sword and shield, so you know that this guy's going to be fishing for the parry. He's going to try to definitely come at you with just spamming R1 attacks, and somehow he was able to contest through our weapon art, but as you can see, when we did connect it, we again took off 45% of his health when we connected the projectile with the weapon art, and the projectile with the attack. I don't know why I keep calling it a weapon art. I do apologize. But you can see that how effective it is if enemies try to contest you with that ability. You can deal a ton of damage and usually always come out on top on a trade. Overall, I think I lost maybe about 3 matches using these weapons, and we won about 20 between the Greatsword of Judgement and the Moonlight Greatsword. So it is actually surprisingly effective, especially someone like me who doesn't really like Greatswords, and I'm not really the best with them. Again, if you're good at spacing, if you're good at fishing out trades, it's kind of like that middleman. And if you watch my Ultra Greatsword videos, you know that I talked a lot about how you're going to always fish for trades. And if you watched any of my videos where I outline smaller weapons or faster weapons, you know I'm all about being agile and fishing in pokes and stuff, and not relying too much on combo damage. The great swords are kind of like in the middle of that, and reasonably so, because they are kind of like the middle weapon. They're not too heavy, they're not ultra great swords, and they're not light, super fast weapons. Unfortunately, here I forgot that I had to repair the weapon from previous fights, so I had to use a repair powder in the middle, and we got hit there, but that's okay. We still can come out on top because, again, the enemy tried to contest our R2, and we hit him with the sword and the projectile. So it's very, very effective. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about that I did mention in the beginning of the video in that little introduction is the effectiveness of Crystal Magic Weapon with heavier weapons. Now, in the Zweihander video that I uploaded, I did talk a little bit about how you do have the option to use the Ultra Greatswords, but it's not really going to be too effective on a mage build if you're fighting an opponent that's kind of a cut above. And the reason for that is because no matter what weapon you buff with Crystal Magic Weapon, it's going to give the standard weapon buff to every weapon. So in this case, on this build, at 60 intelligence with the Court Sorcerer Staff plus 10, we're gaining, I think it's 226 points of magic damage or crystal magic damage on our weapons. So that also translates to whether we're using an Asura Greatsword or a Katana. Obviously, using it on a Katana would be more effective because the weapon is faster and you're getting all that damage for a faster weapon. Now, on an Ultra Greatsword, it being slower, as soon as that Crystal Magic Weapon wears out, you're at a severe damage disadvantage compared to your opponent, because now your weapon loses 226 points of damage. Your weapon isn't really made to be scaling heavily off of dexterity and strengths, and your opponents likely will be maximizing their damage without a buff. So if your opponent is smart, if they see you buff an Ultra Greatsword or any other Ultra weapon with Crystal Magic Weapon, they're just probably going to wait it out. Don't get me wrong, if you can fish in a combo or two, you're going to do a massive amount of damage, but overall it's not that practical to use it as your go-to weapon, like I mentioned in that Zweihander video. You're not going to use it as your go-to weapon, but it is an extra piece of utility that you do have available to you if you see an enemy who's really, trying to fish out parries on you or being super aggressive. If you know that you can kind of go in for a trade with an Ultra Greatsword, then definitely do it. It doesn't mean that they're not available. They're just not the weapons you would want to use specifically for a mage build. The smaller weapons and these weapons, the medium weapons, definitely outclass Ultra Greatswords on this build, but they are still available to you. Anyways, guys, that is the video. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. That's it. Quantum is out.